On the frozen plains of Epsilon 9, the wind howled like a ghost lost in time. Nothing moved for miles except the ice shifting under its own weight and the occasional spark of static from a dead satellite overhead. It was a place forgotten by everyone except those who had nowhere else to go. Lena Hayes trudged through the snow in her heavy thermal suit, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. She was alone, not by choice but by necessity. Her research grant had run dry. Her team had left weeks ago and the outpost had ordered her to pack up. But Lena stayed. Something in the deep scans of the ice field had caught her eye. A faint energy signature buried under 3 meters of permafrost. It made no sense. No ship had crashed here in recorded history. No beacon had ever pinged this sector. Yet the signal pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, steady, and alive. She adjusted her pack and checked her scanner again. The reading hadn't changed. It was still there, faint but real. She followed the signal for 2 more hours until the ice gave way to a dark ridge of twisted metal, half swallowed by the frozen ground. It was wreckage, but unlike anything she had ever seen. The hull shimmered with a pearlescent sheen even under layers of frost, and the edges curved in ways that defied normal engineering. No welds, no bolts, just seamless flow like the ship had grown rather than been built. Lena knelt and brushed snow from a section of the hull. Beneath her glove, the metal felt warm. Not hot, just warm like skin. She frowned. That shouldn't be possible. The ambient temperature was -80. Anything left out here should be frozen solid. Then she saw it. A shape curled against the base of the wreck, small and still. At first she thought it was a bundle of rags or maybe a dead animal, but as she stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. It was a girl. The child looked no older than 10, but something about her was wrong. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a faint silver sheen like moonlight on water. Her hair was long and white as snow, and her ears tapered into delicate points that peeked through the strands. She wore a tattered robe woven from threads that seemed to shift color in the dim light. Lena's heart pounded. This wasn't human. She approached slowly, hands raised, palms out in the universal sign of peace. The girl didn't move. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. Beside her, a small creature no bigger than a house cat lay pressed against her side. It had smooth obsidian scales that glowed faintly at the edges and a pair of wings folded tight against its back. Its eyes snapped open as Lena neared. Golden and slit like a cat's, but filled with intelligence far beyond any animal. The creature let out a low hum. Not a growl, but a vibration that made Lena's bones ache. It didn't attack. It just watched her. "Hey," Lena said softly, her voice muffled by the helmet. "I'm not going to hurt you." She knelt a few feet away and slowly unsealed her helmet. The cold bit her face, but she ignored it. She needed the girl to see her eyes to know she was real. The girl stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open and Lena gasped. Her eyes were violet, deep and endless like galaxies trapped in glass. They held fear but also something else, recognition. As if she had been waiting. Lena didn't know what to say. She reached into her pack and pulled out a thermal blanket and a nutrient bar. She placed them on the snow between them and sat back. The small dragon, Lena already thought of it that way, sniffed the air, then nudged the girl gently. The girl looked at the offerings, then at Lena. After a long moment, she reached out and took the blanket. Her fingers were cold, but her touch was steady. Lena watched as the girl wrapped herself in the dragon and the blanket. The creature curled into her lap and let out a soft purr that sounded like distant thunder. "Do you understand me?" Lena asked. The girl shook her head slightly, but then tilted her head as if listening to something far away. She opened her mouth and made a sound. Not words, but a series of clear musical notes that hung in the air like chimes. The notes shimmered, and for a second Lena saw colors bloom in the cold air. Soft blues and golds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Lena's scanner beeped. She glanced at it and her eyes widened. The girl's biosignature was off the charts. Her cells regenerated at an impossible rate. Her brain emitted faint quantum pulses and her blood contained traces of an element not found on the periodic table. This wasn't just alien. This was something ancient. Something powerful. Over the next few hours, Lena set up a small shelter using her emergency tent. She heated water and offered it to the girl who drank it slowly, never taking her eyes off Lena. The dragon, Lena decided to call him Ember, watched everything with quiet intensity. He didn't eat, but he did lap at the warm water, and his scales seemed to brighten with every passing minute. Back at Outpost, Theta, things were not quiet. Command had noticed Lena's extended stay and her unusual energy readings. Captain Rios had sent 2 messages already demanding she return, but Lena ignored them. She couldn't leave. Not now. When she finally carried the girl and Ember back to her rover, the child didn't resist. She held Ember close and leaned against Lena as if she had known her for years. The journey back took 6 hours. The girl slept most of the way, her head resting on Lena's shoulder. Ember stayed awake, his golden eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger. At the outpost, the medbay was empty. Lena ran a full diagnostic. The results were more confusing than before. The girl showed no signs of malnutrition or exposure, despite being buried in ice for who knew how long. Her body temperature was normal. Her vitals were perfect, and when Lena tried to take a blood sample, the needle bent against her skin. "Okay," Lena whispered. "You're not just special. You're impossible." That night, Lena sat by the medbay window watching the stars. The girl slept in a warm bed, Ember coiled at her feet. Suddenly, the girl sat up, her eyes wide. She pointed to the sky and made a sound, a single high note that made the lights flicker. Lena followed her gaze. Far above, a ship hung in orbit, sleek and black with no markings. It hadn't been there before. Her stomach dropped. Someone had found them. She turned to the girl, who was now staring at her with urgent violet eyes. The girl touched her own chest, then pointed to Lena, then to the sky. She wasn't just saying, "They're here." She was saying, "They're after me." Lena's mind raced. Who would send a silent ship to a dead ice world for a child no one knew existed? Then she remembered an old archive she had skimmed during her xenobiology training. A myth. A race called the Velari, tall, graceful beings who lived in crystal cities and spoke in song. They vanished centuries ago. Some said they ascended. Others said they were wiped out, and they were always described with violet eyes and silver skin. Lena looked at the girl, then at Ember, then at the black ship hanging like a shadow in the sky. They hadn't abandoned her in silence. They had hidden her, and now someone had broken that silence. Lena stood and locked the medbay door. She activated the outpost's emergency shield protocol and sent a false signal to Central Command saying she was evacuating due to a reactor leak. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy them time. She turned back to the girl, who was now watching her with quiet trust. "I don't know who you are," Lena said softly, "but I won't let them take you." The girl smiled faintly. Then she reached out and took Lena's hand. Her touch was warm, and for the first time in weeks, Lena didn't feel alone. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, something new had begun. Days passed in the quiet hum of Outpost Theta. The black ship remained in orbit but made no move to land. Lena took that as a small mercy. She kept the comms silent and the lights dim. Every hour she checked the perimeter sensors, and every night she slept with a pulse pistol under her pillow. The girl, Lena still didn't know her real name, began to open up. She didn't speak standard English, but she learned quickly. She pointed to things and watched Lena's lips as she named them. Cup, blanket, star, dragon. Lena called her Syl. It sounded soft like wind through glass bells, and it fit. Syl spent most of her time near the observation window staring at the sky. Ember stayed close, always within arm's reach. The little dragon had grown slightly since they arrived, his scales now catching the light like polished onyx. He no longer glowed faintly, but pulsed with a steady warmth that made the air around him shimmer. One evening, Syl touched the glass and hummed a low note. The frost on the outside melted in a perfect spiral. Lena watched in awe. "You did that," she whispered. Syl nodded, then pointed to her own head and tapped her temple twice. She closed her eyes and took Lena's hand. At first, nothing happened. Then a wave of images flooded Lena's mind. Tall towers made of living crystal rivers of light flowing through streets filled with beings like Syl, their skin shimmering, their voices weaving songs that shaped the air, a council of elders with eyes like dying stars, a great hall where time itself seemed to bend. Then came fear, Syl standing alone in that hall, the elders turning away, hands raised not in anger but in sorrow, a door closing, darkness, cold, silence. Lena gasped and pulled her hand back. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't understand all of it, but she felt the pain, the betrayal. "They left you," she said. Syl nodded slowly. Her violet eyes filled with sadness, but also something else, determination. That night, Lena dug deeper into the outpost's archives. She bypassed the usual filters and accessed the deep xenohistory files. Most were redacted, but one fragment remained. It spoke of the Velari not as myth, but as real. They were harmonic architects, beings who could shape matter and energy through sound and resonance. They didn't build cities, they sang them into existence, but their power came with a cost. Every generation produced a harmonic prime, a child born with the ability to tune reality itself. Such a being could heal dying stars or unravel entire fleets with a single note, but if unbalanced, they could also shatter worlds by accident. The last known prime vanished 300 years ago. The Violary sealed their borders soon after, then they disappeared. Lena looked at Syl sleeping peacefully, with Ember curled against her chest. She wasn't just a lost girl, she was the last harmonic prime and someone wanted her. The next morning the outpost systems glitched. Lights flickered. The gravity stabilizer stuttered for 3 seconds. Coffee floated in midair before crashing to the floor. Ember hissed and his scales turned deep red. Syl sat up straight, her eyes wide. She pressed her hands to her temples and let out a soft whine. Lena checked the diagnostics. Nothing was wrong with the hardware. It was as if space itself had hiccuped. Then she noticed something strange. Every time Syl got upset or scared, the anomalies worsened. When she calmed down, they faded. It wasn't the outpost malfunctioning. It was Syl. Her emotions were bending local physics. Lena sat beside her and took her hand. "Breathe," she said gently. "You're safe here." Syl closed her eyes and focused. Slowly the lights steadied. The air grew still. Ember's scales returned to black. But the truth was clear. Syl's power was waking up, and it was tied to her feelings. That afternoon, Lena found encrypted logs hidden in the wreckage's data core. She spent hours decoding them. The files were fragmented, but one message repeated like a prayer. She sees the fracture. They will not listen. Exile is the only path. Protect the song. Another log showed a star map with one system circled, Epsilon 9. And a final note. The silence must hold until the new singers rise. Lena's blood ran cold. The Valari hadn't abandoned Syl out of cruelty. They had hidden her because they feared what she might become and what others might do to her. And now the silence was broken. 2 days later, a transmission came through, not on official channels but on an old emergency band. It was audio only, a calm voice with no emotion. "Outpost Theta. This is Concordance Envoy Vessel Sovereign. We request immediate docking clearance for humanitarian inspection." Lena's hand shook. The Galactic Concordance was the ruling body of known space. They kept peace among 1,000 species, but they also controlled all advanced tech, all travel, all truth, and they never sent envoys to dead ice worlds. She didn't reply. An hour later, the black ship moved. It descended slowly, silent and smooth like a blade through water. It landed 1/2 kilometer from the outpost. No ramp lowered. No signal sent, just waiting. That night, Syl had a nightmare. She screamed in a language of chimes and echoes. The walls of the med bay rippled like water. Ember roared, a sound like cracking stone, and flames flickered from his mouth, though they left no heat. Lena held Syl until she calmed. The girl was trembling. "What did you see?" Lena asked. Syl pointed to her own chest, then made a tearing motion. She mimed Needles Machine's cages. Then she pointed to the sky and shook her head violently. They wanted to take her apart, to study her, to use her. Lena made a decision. They couldn't stay. She packed food, water, medkits, and the data core. She loaded the rover with extra fuel cells and shielded the comms. She wrote a fake log saying she was transferring Syl to Central Med for psych evaluation and triggered a false reactor alarm to explain the rush. As they drove away, Ember sat on Syl's lap, his eyes fixed on the black ship. Syl watched it too, her small hands clenched in her robe. They reached the edge of the ice field just as dawn broke. The rover's engine whined under the strain. Behind them, the outpost lights dimmed. The Concordance ship lifted off silently and turned toward them. Lena pushed the throttle. They raced across the frozen tundra, heading for the old salvage yard on the far side of the planet. It was abandoned but had a hidden hangar and a working scout ship, the Wayfarer, left behind by smugglers years ago. Halfway there, the rover's systems failed. Not from damage, but from something deeper. The engine sputtered. The nav screen filled with static. Even the heater died. Syl cried out and clutched her head. Her eyes glowed faintly violet. "It's okay," Lena said, though her voice shook. "We're close." She grabbed Syl and Ember and ran. The wind cut like knives. Snow blinded them. But Lena knew the path. She had mapped it during her early surveys. They reached the hangar just as the Concordance ship appeared over the ridge. Lena activated the Wayfarer's power core. It coughed, then roared to life. She shoved Syl and Ember inside and sealed the hatch. As they lifted off, the hangar exploded behind them, silent beams of energy vaporizing the structure. Lena punched the thrusters. The Wayfarer shot into the sky, shaking like a leaf in a storm. Sil stared out the viewport, tears streaming down her face. Ember pressed against her side, his body warm and steady. Lena set a course for the Nebula of Whispers, a chaotic region of space where sensors failed and navigation was guesswork. It was the only place the Concordance wouldn't follow. As the planet shrank below them, Lena looked at Sil. "Who are you, really?" she asked. Sil placed a hand on the ship's console. She closed her eyes and sang. One pure note, the stars outside bent. The ship leaped forward faster than light should allow. And in that moment, Lena understood Sil wasn't just running, she was leading to somewhere only she could hear. The Nebula of Whispers hung in space like a wound in the dark. Clouds of ionized gas swirled in slow motion, painted in colors that had no name. Here the laws of physics bent and frayed. Time stretched in places and snapped in others. Ships that entered rarely came out the same, if they came out at all. Lena guided the Wayfarer through the outer veil, her hands tight on the controls. The ship groaned as strange energies licked its hull. Sensors flickered uselessly. Comms were dead. Even the stars outside seemed to blink in and out of existence. Sil sat in the co-pilot seat. Her eyes closed, her fingers resting lightly on the console. Ember lay curled at her feet, his scales pulsing in time with the nebula's glow. He had not eaten in days, but he did not seem weak. Instead, he shimmered as if made of light held in shadow. "You've been here before," Lena said, not as a question, but as a feeling. Sil opened her eyes and nodded. She pointed ahead, then made a swirling motion with her hand. She hummed a low note, and the gas ahead parted like a curtain, revealing a narrow path through the storm. Lena followed it. Deep inside the nebula, they found it, a structure floating in perfect silence. It was not a ship nor a station. It was a spire of crystal taller than mountains, its surface etched with spirals that shifted when you looked away. It gave off no signal, no heat, no sound, yet it felt alive. Sil stood the moment she saw it. Her breath caught. Tears welled in her violet eyes. "What is it?" Lena asked. Sil touched her chest, then pointed to the spire. "Home," she whispered. It was the first real word she had spoken in Standard. They docked in a bay that opened for them without a command. The air inside was warm and smelled of ozone and something sweet like blooming night flowers. The walls glowed softly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. As they stepped out, Ember let out a soft chirp and ran ahead, his claws clicking on the smooth floor. Sil followed slowly, her hand trailing along the wall as if greeting an old friend. Lena stayed close, her pistol ready. Though she knew it would be useless here, they reached a central chamber. In the center floated a sphere of liquid light. It swirled with images. Cities of song stars being born, wars fought with sound alone. Sil approached it. The light reached for her like a hand. She placed her palm on the surface. Instantly, the room filled with music. Not from speakers, but from the air itself. The walls, the floor, the very atoms around them vibrated with a melody older than time. Lena fell to her knees, overwhelmed. The song was not just sound. It was memory. Truth. Purpose. She saw the Vailari not as distant myths, but as guardians. They did not rule. They listened. They heard the song of the universe and kept it in tune. When a star grew sick, they sang it back to health. When a species strayed into darkness, they whispered warnings in dreams. But harmony requires balance, and Sil was born unbalanced. Not broken, just too strong. She heard not just the song, but the silence between the notes. She saw the fractures in reality, the places where the music was fraying. She warned the elders. She showed them the coming unraveling. But they feared her vision. They called it chaos. So they sealed her memories, locked her power, and sent her away with Ember as her only witness. The song shifted. Now it showed what Sil had seen, the true cataclysm. It was not destruction. It was a shift. A great turning. The universe was preparing to sing a new verse, but only if a new species learned to listen. And that species was humanity. Not because they were perfect, but because they felt deeply. They loved fiercely. They created beauty from pain. They asked questions even when there were no answers. The Vailari had waited for them, and Sil was the bridge. The vision ended. The light sphere dimmed. Sil collapsed. Lena caught her before she hit the floor. The girl was burning up, her skin glowing faintly. Ember rushed to her side, his body radiating heat. "What's happening?" Lena cried. Sil looked at her, eyes wide with fear. She pointed to Ember, then to her own chest, then made a crumbling motion with her hands. Lena understood. Using her power was killing her and Ember was taking the overflow. She watched in horror as the little dragon's scales began to harden, turning from smooth black to rough crystal. His wings stiffened. His breathing slowed. "No," Lena whispered. "There has to be another way." She searched the chamber frantically. Along one wall she found a console of living crystal. Symbols glowed beneath her touch. She didn't know the language, but she placed her hand where Syl's had been. The console responded. Images formed in the air, diagrams of resonance fields, energy pathways, a process called harmonic transfer. It showed that a guardian dragon could absorb a prime's excess energy, but only up to a point. Beyond that, the dragon would crystallize completely and dissolve into pure resonance. Ember was close to that point. Lena turned to Syl, who was now barely conscious. "You can't keep using your power like this," she said. "You'll lose him. And yourself." Syl shook her head weakly. She pointed to the nebula outside, then to the concordance symbol that had begun flashing on the chamber wall. They were coming. Even here they had found them. Lena looked at the console again. One symbol stood out, a spiral within a circle. It pulsed with urgency. She pressed it. The floor opened. A staircase of light descended into the heart of the spire. Syl stirred. She grabbed Lena's hand and pulled her toward the stairs. Ember followed, though his steps were slow, his body now half crystal. They went down for what felt like hours. The air grew warmer, thicker with song. At the bottom they found a room unlike any other. In the center floated a single note, a visible thread of sound suspended in air. It glowed with every color and none at all. Syl approached it reverently. This was the first note, the seed of all harmony. To touch it was to become part of the song forever. But it required a sacrifice, not of life, but of form. Syl turned to Lena, her eyes full of sorrow and hope. She placed a hand on Ember's head. The dragon nuzzled her one last time, then stepped forward. He touched the note with his snout. Light exploded. Not blinding, but gentle. It filled the room, then the spire, then the nebula. Ember did not vanish. He transformed. His body became pure resonance, a living echo that wrapped around Syl like a shield. His voice joined hers not as a pet, but as a partner. Syl stood taller. Her skin stopped glowing. Her breathing steadied. She was no longer just a child. She was a conductor, and the song was hers to guide. Outside the nebula, the Concordance fleet arrived. 3 warships, dark and silent. They fired no weapons. They simply formed a triangle around the spire, blocking all escape. A voice echoed through the chamber, not through speakers, but through the air itself. "Surrender the Prime. She is unstable. She will break reality if left unchecked." Lena stepped forward. "You're wrong. She's not breaking it. She's healing it." The voice paused. "You are human. You do not understand the scale of this power." "Maybe not," Lena said, "but I understand her. And she's not yours to take." Syl walked to the center of the room. She closed her eyes. Ember's resonance hummed around her like a second skin. She began to sing, not a song of war, not a song of fear, a song of truth. The spire answered. The nebula answered. The very fabric of space bent to her voice. The concordant ships flickered. Their shields failed. Their engines died. But they were not destroyed. Instead, every screen on every ship lit up with visions. The Vylari cities. The great turning the role humanity was meant to play. The truth flooded their minds, and for the first time in centuries the concordance hesitated. Lena watched Syl, her heart full. The girl was no longer lost. She was becoming, and humanity was no longer alone. They were finally ready to sing. The concordance fleet hung in the nebula like statues. Their weapons were dark, their engines silent. Inside every ship confusion spread. Officers stared at screens showing visions they could not deny. Soldiers dropped their rifles. Even the admiral sat frozen as the truth sank in. But not all were moved. From the lead vessel a single figure emerged. He wore a long gray coat with silver thread woven into the collar. His face was sharp, his eyes cold. This was Admiral Vex, the highest enforcer of the Concordance Code. He had spent his life hunting anomalies like Syl. To him she was not a bridge but a threat. He stepped onto a shuttle and flew toward the spire alone. Lena saw him coming. She stood at the observation arch, her arms crossed. Syl stood beside her, calm now, her eyes clear. Ember's presence hummed around her like a soft wind. The shuttle docked. The hatch opened. Admiral Vex walked in without fear. You have shown them a dream, he said, his voice smooth but hard. But dreams do not govern galaxies. Order does. Lena stepped forward. You call locking away a child order? She is not a child, Vex replied. She is a weapon. One that could unravel space-time if she sneezes wrong. The Vailari knew this. That is why they exiled her. Syl shook her head. She raised her hand and made a gentle sweeping motion. The air shimmered and an image formed. A Vailari elder placing a hand on her forehead, not in judgment but in blessing. They did not exile me, Syl said slowly, her voice clearer than before. They protected the song until the new singers were ready. Vex's eyes narrowed. And you believe humans are those singers they feel? Syl said simply. They create. They hope even when there is no reason. That is how harmony begins. Vex was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. I offer you a choice. Come with me willingly. Your power will be studied, not used. Humanity will be granted full membership in the Concordance. Your colonies will be safe. Your people will thrive, Lena stiffened. It sounded generous. But she knew the truth. Once Syl was in their labs, they would never let her go. They would drain her knowledge until nothing was left. And if we say no? Lena asked. Vex's expression hardened. Then I will activate the resonance dampeners. They will silence her song forever. She will live but as a normal girl, powerless, forgotten. Syl's eyes widened. Ember's hum turned sharp. Lena knew what that meant. To silence Syl was to break her soul. You would rather destroy a miracle than share the future, Lena said. I would rather preserve reality than gamble on hope. Vex replied. He turned to leave. You have until dawn. When he was gone, Syl sank to her knees. Her hands trembled. He does not understand, she whispered. The song cannot be silenced. It can only be ignored. And when it is ignored, everything breaks. Lena knelt beside her. What do we do? Syl looked up, her violet eyes full of resolve. I must sing the full truth. Not just to them, but to everyone. That could kill you or save us all. She stood and walked to the center of the chamber. Ember flowed around her like living shadow. The spire responded. Crystals along the walls began to glow brighter. The air grew thick with potential. Lena activated the Wayfarer's comms and linked it to the spire's broadcast array. If Syl was going to speak, she would be heard across 1,000 worlds. As night deepened in the nebula, Syl began. She did not shout. She did not rage. She sang softly at first like a lullaby. The notes carried images not just of the Vailari, or the coming shift, but of every species the Concordance had silenced. She showed the Ketheri whose planet was mined dry, because they refused to join the trade grid. The Zoran children taken from their parents for cognitive alignment. The Mylan monks, whose temples were erased because their meditations disrupted surveillance. Fields one by one, the hidden crimes of the Concordance unfolded in song. On every ship in the fleet, officers dropped to their knees. Some wept, others screamed in rage. The truth was too vast to deny. Admiral Vex stood on his bridge, his face pale. He tried to shut it off, but the song was not in the speakers. It was in their minds, in their bones. He activated the dampeners. A low hum filled space. It was designed to cancel harmonic frequencies, to silence primes. But Syl was not just a prime anymore. She was the song itself. She raised her voice, and the nebula answered. Light erupted from the spire, not as an explosion, but as a wave. It passed through the dampeners like they were smoke. It touched every ship, every mind, every heart. The Concordance fleet did not fall. It woke up. On the bridge of the lead ship, a young officer stood and removed his insignia. I resign, he said. Others followed. Across the fleet, soldiers laid down their arms. Captains cut ties with Central Command. The Concordance was fracturing not by force but by truth. But the effort cost Syl dearly. Her skin grew pale. Her breath came in short gasps. Ember's form flickered like a dying flame. Lena rushed to her side. Stop, she begged. You've done enough, Syl shook her head. Not yet. She turned her gaze to the stars beyond the nebula, and she sang one final note, the note of choice. It carried across the galaxy. On Earth, people paused in their streets. On Mars, miners dropped their tools. In the outer colonies, children looked up at the sky. They all heard it. Not as sound, but as knowing. Humanity was no longer just a species, it was a promise. Syl collapsed. Lena caught her before she hit the floor. The girl's body was cold, her eyes fluttering. Ember lay beside her, his form almost transparent. "No," Lena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't go," Syl smiled weakly. She touched Lena's cheek. "I am not leaving. I am becoming." Her body began to glow, not with heat but with light. It spread slowly, filling the chamber with soft radiance. Ember's form dissolved into the same light, wrapping around her like a cocoon. Lena held her as the light grew brighter. Outside the nebula, the first ships of rebellion lifted off. Former Concordance vessels turned toward home, not to fight but to free. And in the heart of the spire, Syl let go. Not of life, but of limits. Her form faded, her voice remained, and the song continued. The sky above Jupiter's rings burned with fire that was not fire. Ships twisted and broke apart like toys in a storm. Human vessels, small and fragile, darted between the massive Corax war cruisers, firing not with rage but with purpose. They were not soldiers trained for galactic war. They were miners, scientists, pilots, and students who had chosen to stand for something they barely understood. A little girl from another world, and the dragon who loved her. Down in the medical bay of the hidden base beneath Mars, Claire Dawson held Alara's hand. The child's skin had been dull for days, like a lamp running out of oil. But now, after the glowing fungus from the heart of the red giant was given to her, light returned. Soft at first, then stronger. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, silver and warm, spreading through her veins like liquid starlight. Her eyes opened, clear, bright, and full of life. Calyx lay beside her, his storm-gray scales still cracked from his dive into the sun. But he lifted his head when Alara stirred. A low hum came from his chest, not a growl, but a sound of relief. He nudged her gently with his snout. She smiled and reached up to touch his horn. No words were needed. They had always understood each other. Outside, the battle grew louder. Alarms blared through the base. Red lights flashed on the walls. Zoe Kim's voice came over the comm, sharp but steady. "They're pushing hard near Ganymede. We lost 2 shuttles, but the drone swarm is working. They can't lock onto our signals," Mia Torres added. "I rerouted power from the ice mines. Shields are holding. For now." Claire didn't answer. She just kept holding Alara's hand. She knew the humans were outmatched. The Corax had weapons that could crack planets. But they didn't know humans. They didn't know how humans fought when they believed in something. And right now, Earth believed in Alara. Lyra stood by the window, watching the distant flashes of light in space. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled. She had spent her whole life avoiding contact with other species. The Eldari had hidden for centuries, guarding their secrets, protecting their children. Trusting outsiders was unthinkable. Yet here she was, on a human world, watching humans risk everything for her daughter. She turned to Claire. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you do this? You do not even know us." Claire looked at her, tired but sure. "Because someone needed help. And we were here, that was all. No grand speech, no promise of reward. Just kindness. Simple, human kindness." Up in orbit, the tide began to turn. Not because humans had better guns, but because they were unpredictable. They used old mining drones filled with reflective foil to blind Corax sensors. They played Alara's lullaby, recorded from her humming while she slept through every open channel. The sound, soft and strange, confused the Corax AI. It wasn't a weapon, but it made their targeting systems glitch. For a few seconds, that was enough. A young pilot named Lena Cruz, barely 20, flew her tiny scout ship straight into the path of a Corax beam meant for a hospital station. She didn't survive. But her sacrifice gave others time to escape. Her last words were, "Tell my mom I saw a dragon." Calyx heard that. Somehow, through the chaos, through the static, the dragon felt her courage. He rose to his feet, wings unfolding with a sound like thunder rolling over mountains. His eyes glowed brighter than ever. "I must go," he said, not in words but in a thought that filled Claire's mind. She understood. "No," Lyra said, stepping forward. "You are still weak." Calyx looked at Alara. The girl nodded. "You have to," she whispered. "They're fighting for us. Now we fight for them." With a powerful leap, Calyx burst through the hangar doors, wings catching the thin Martian air. He shot upward faster than any ship, a streak of gray lightning against the black sky. In space, he did not breathe fire. He did something far stranger. He spread his wings wide and began to sing. Not with his voice, but with his very being. His scales shimmered, reflecting starlight, bending energy, creating a shield made of pure resonance. It wasn't solid, but it scattered Korax beams, turned deadly rays into harmless light. Human ships moved behind him, protected. They fired their weapons not with hatred but with hope. The Korax commander aboard his flagship stared at the readings. "What is that creature?" he demanded. "It is not in our database," his officer replied. "It should not exist." "It breaks the laws of physics," another said. The commander growled. "Then we erase it." But before he could give the order, his ship shuddered. A human freighter, loaded not with bombs but with frozen nitrogen, had crashed into his engine array. It was a desperate move, suicidal, but it worked. The flagship spun out of control. One by one, the Korax ships pulled back. Not because they were defeated, but because they were confused. They had come expecting fear, greed, weakness. Instead, they found unity, sacrifice, and a dragon singing in the void. The battle ended not with a bang, but with silence. Back on Mars, Ilara sat up. Her light was steady now, strong. She looked at her mother. "They saved us," she said. Lyra knelt and hugged her tightly. "Yes, and we will never forget." Claire stood nearby, watching them. She felt tired, but also proud. She had not fired a single shot. She had not commanded a fleet. She had only said yes when asked for help. And that had been enough. Days passed. The Korax were gone for now. Earth began to heal. The world talked about what had happened. Some called it a miracle. Others called it the day humanity grew up. But most just called it the day we stood with the stars. The Eldari prepared to leave. Their ship, repaired with human parts and Eldari magic, waited in the hangar. Before they boarded, Lyra walked up to Claire. In her hand, she held a small pendant shaped like a star. It glowed faintly, warm to the touch. "This is a bond token," Lyra said. "It carries a piece of our home. When you hold it, know that somewhere across the stars you have family." Claire took it. It felt alive, like a heartbeat in her palm. "Thank you," she said. Ilara ran forward and hugged her. "Come visit us," she said. "Calix says you're the bravest human he's ever met." Calix lowered his head in a bow. Not to a hero. To a friend, then they left. The ship rose silently, vanishing into the sky until it was just a speck, then nothing at all. Claire stood there for a long time, the pendant in her hand. Around her, people worked, laughed, lived. The world kept turning. But something had changed. Not just for her, but for everyone. Humans were no longer alone in the universe. And more importantly, they had proven they could be trusted. Not because they were strong, but because they were kind. That night, Claire went to the surface of Mars. She looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, a little girl with silver skin was safe. A dragon flew beside her, and a family remembered the human who said yes. She smiled. The stars seemed brighter now. Back on Earth, children drew pictures of dragons in school. Scientists studied the data from the battle, not to build weapons, but to understand unity. And in quiet homes, parents told their kids the story of the alien family that trusted a human, and how that trust changed everything. No one called it a war story. They called it a promise. Because now, whenever a strange ship appeared in the sky, humans didn't reach for guns first. They reached for translators, for open hands, for hope. And somewhere far away, Ilara looked at her mother and said, "Do you think Claire is looking at the stars too?" Lyra smiled. "I know she is." Calix curled around them both, his wings like a blanket against the cold of space. And in the silence between stars, a new kind of peace began to grow. Not built on fear, but on the simple, powerful act of helping someone in need. That was the real victory. Not the battle won, but the trust earned. And it all started with one human who said yes.